Um, if you've just joined in, if you've just entered the Zoom today, welcome. If you are new, I don't see many names that are too new, but if you are joining in for the first time, welcome to the well-branded webinars. We do them weekly, or I do them weekly. And if you guys haven't yet accessed the library section of the website, if you subscribe to the newsletter, all the information related to old webinars, worksheets, anything that we've discussed is going to be in that area, so you can pick it up at any stage. If you've missed a session, the webinar will be on there, the worksheets that we're correlating will be on there, so you can just join in. So we're going to start with our section today on content creation. Very, very interesting section for us to be working with. So when we start, I want you to keep in mind, like what we said last week, content creation is so much more than just social media. Social media is a very small part of the content we're creating, and it's definitely not the only thing you need to be focusing on. So when I'm talking about content, I'm talking about social media, I'm talking about blogs, I'm talking about websites, I'm talking about review sites. And if you need a refresher on what sort of aspects we're talking about when we talk about the idea of social media, then jump on to last week's webinar, which was focused on social media part 1, which sort of gave you that introduction as to what the bigger picture of social media is. So once we start, like with everything, it's important for me that you understand what the word means, because we live in a world where there's a lot of terminology thrown around very often. And when we talk about being a content creator or being an influencer or being a content professional, it's a very, very specific type of area that we're talking about. Now, today we're talking about content creation, which means everyone, you, me, anyone that creates content for your brand, for your business, for yourself, you essentially are a content creator. Now, you might see in people's Instagram bios, for argument's sake, that they refer to themselves as content creators. I have it in my bio. So I don't consider myself an influencer. Perhaps some part, and we'll get into this when we talk about influencer marketing, but some part of my profile might fall under that category. But for me, I spend a lot of time creating content, and that content might influence decisions and might influence sort of someone's buying ability or booking a trip or whatever. But essentially, my focus is always about creating content. So creating something that's usable, that's educational, that will change your perspective on something you do or something you're looking at. So content creators produce entertaining educational material, and it caters to interests and challenges of their target audience. Now, target audience, again, trigger word, we've been using it every week. Again, if you need to go back to the breakdown, it's the most essential part of everything we're doing, because if you don't know what your audience is, you don't know where to find them, or what your focus needs to be with them, then everything you subsequently build on top of that is going to be a little bit shaky. So the content that you produce can take different forms. Like I said earlier, it can be a blog post, it can be a video, it can be an ebook, it can be photos, whatever it is that you are putting together, you are creating, that you're putting out, that you are sharing or distributing is your content. And today we use a lot of these content to engage with our clients and our customer base. So perhaps 10 or 15 years ago, the content word wasn't as much of a buzz as it is now when you looked at things like advertising and consumer behavior and all of that. But today, every brand has to have a content marketing strategy, because it's essentially anything that they communicate with that would be considered content. So you are, in essence, a content creator. Now, when you're creating your content, and I'm going to leave content as the word for now because it is very broad and it is very generic. So when you're creating your content, there's a couple things you can do to help spark that cycle of where it needs to come from, what you need to be doing with it. And this is a couple of the things I need you to be thinking about. So for me, when I'm reading the news, when I'm looking at press, when I'm staying in touch with what's going on in the world, it always will give you some sort of content. Whether you decide early on, and this comes back to your brand story and the values of who you are as a brand, if you decide to be a brand that stays kind of neutral on anything political, that's totally fine. But then you might draw from the news on happy news. You might draw from Pancake Day. You might draw from a lot of different things that are going to be present in the news and in the media that will give you content. So on a day where you might be stuck, where you might be kind of finding yourself struggling. And everyone has it. Everyone has a day where they sit there with their blog or their website or their Instagram and their social media handles, and they think, I really don't know what I need to post today. Like, I know I need to post because we know that engagement is important and putting out content on a regular basis is important. But sometimes you go day 1, day 2, day 3, and you're like, oh, I just don't have anything. I don't have good photos. I don't have good information. There's nothing going on with the brand particularly that you have to share. So drawing inspiration from things around you is important. Write regularly is something that you need to decide for yourself, but it needs to happen. So whether you're a daily posting brand, whether you're a every 2 or 3, maybe you post on different mediums every other day, you need to use the data analysis that we've gone through in all the steps leading up to this point to work out what frequency your posts need to be happening. So if we can go back to our conversation about communication strategy, you need to really understand that audience of yours that you own, or the audience that you're wanting to acquire, to know how frequently you need to post. There's pros and cons of posting too regularly. There's definitely cons of not posting regularly enough, because you do sort of lose that space as top of mind. So when you go through your analytics and your frequency and you look at the posts that have performed, or the blog posts that have got the most hits, or the days your website gets the most traffic, use that data to help you pin down when you need to be posting and on what medium. Now, studying your industry's audience just is a different way of saying know your audience. So we spoke about how you need to understand who your competitors are and who is responding to them and who's engaging with them in last week and a few weeks before, from fine tuning to communication. And when you're creating your content, it's no different. We have to know who our audience is, what their interests are, and what we need to be sharing with them on a regular basis. So what are they responding well to? What are they maybe not responding well to? And go from there. It's important, and this is not specific to content, it's specific to your brand, and we've spoken about this as well, to know your own voice and remain authentic, to remain honest. You know, given even just the past week's episodes that have gone in the world, you can see glaring examples of brands that have done well, brands that have just leveraged it as an opportunity, and brands that have absolutely made a mess of the situation by posting all the wrong things and saying all the wrong things, or saying nothing, and that being a big issue. So you have to be very careful if you are going to go the route, and I'm going to say this now because I think it's topical, if you are going to go the route of supporting these bigger causes of the world or humanity, which is, I personally have no problem with you doing, my advice to you with regard to content around very sensitive and heated and sort of pressure point type subject matter is to be very authentic, is my first thing, which we should be always. And is to be very careful about how you word things, what you're saying, and be very honest with yourself about what you're wanting to get out of it. Just posting because it's hype, just posting because it's buzz, just posting because it's a cool thing to do is never a good intention to join these campaigns. You're better off just standing back and maybe sharing something on your stories. If you believe in a cause, and it's not necessarily just what's going on at the moment with Black Lives Matter, if you believe in a cause and you believe in a movement or whatever is going on in the world that you're wanting to support, Whale Day, you know, plastic, sustainability, whatever cause you back, you've got to be dedicated, because no matter what you do, the minute you go live on any platform that's public, you'll be open to positive and negative feedback. And if your intention behind your action wasn't from a very sort of sincere brand value perspective, audiences can see right through that these days. Audiences are quite smart. So as a sidebar to the slide that we're looking on, jump on any cause that you believe in, but believe in that cause is what I would say, because I did get a few questions about that this week. So it is important that you back causes, but you have to personally and professionally, I think from a business perspective, you have to be behind them, because audiences are very smart, and you would have seen plenty of occasions where people were called out. You know, the big American business coach, Marie Forleo, got herself into a whole lot of trouble. And she's one of many people that found themselves on the wrong side of the conversation to start with, and then really had to backpedal to kind of gain a little bit of ground with certain audience groups. So if you're going to do that, just be smart about it. Also, I'm going to say at this point, don't create content for hype. Create content because you have a need or a ability to share something, that there's something that speaks to you and that you feel your audiences are going to benefit from. Because overhyping you know, dramatization and just sharing things for the sake of it or because it's cool on that day. You have to be very careful, because what you put out anywhere, digital space, any space, you'll be surprised how audiences remember it. So if today you putting out content about how you stand for X, Y, and Z as a company, or your brand ethics are this, this, and this, and then 5 years later you do something that goes against that, you will potentially find audiences that pick that up. So be authentic, our overhanging umbrella to anything that we do. Be authentic, be consistent, and just be sincere about everything that you do. So going back to the slide, we're looking at tips for creating your content. Establish your own voice, be authentic with your own voice. Look at other people's content. I have no problem with us sharing and repurposing, but if, for example, you're sharing an inspirational quote, or if you're sharing a piece of advice or anything that's not yours, you need to credit. So if you are going to share a marketing quote by Seth Godin, if you are going to share, you know, say you've got a partner or competitor, or maybe not a competitor, if you've got someone in your industry that's come up with your top 10 tips to survive summer and it's brand neutral on their part and you really like it, share it by all means, but don't usurp content. Make sure that if you're sharing content that does not belong to you, that you either ask permission in the case of photography or videography, or you credit them, and very clearly, not blind tag them and say, oh, you were tagged in there. If it's not your content and you don't own it, you need to credit people. And that's something I'm very, very, very particular on. And there's no harm in crediting it. Yes, some of your audience might end up on their page and move away from yours, but it's not your content. You don't own that intellectual property. Understanding your KPIs is also important. Obviously, what is the purpose of what you're doing? What is it that you're going to be able to assess? So KPIs, for anyone that doesn't know, stands for key performance indicators. So if you are putting out a piece of content about an offer or a deal, and I'm going to get onto an example that I've used because I think it really fills out the explanation of thinking about repurposing and sustainable content. So think about what you're trying to achieve as a brand, what your objectives are as a brand, and what your objectives and your mission is for your social media platforms. And we said last week, like with the communication strategies, you create your comms boxes of which you put all your communication strategy efforts or plans into, and you separate them out according to the different mediums. We do the same thing with social media. So your blog, your website, all the different elements that you're going to activate across, you put out on a page. I use a page, you can use digital, and you plan what's actually going to go into them. So you know ahead of time what you have to work with. And then when your messaging comes in, you know how you need to be distributing that. Network at every opportunity. It comes back to just knowing what's going on. You know, I would put things like reading the news, networking, you know, knowing what the pressure points in your audience groups are, knowing what the emotional connections in your audience groups are. I'll put all of that into the ear on the ground category, because if you have a good handle on what the developments in your industry are and, you know, what your audience interests are, then you're never going to run out of content. Because if you can't talk about your brand today, you can talk about maybe a developer or an international trend that's occurring. Coffee is a great example. If you're a coffee shop in one region and you're running out of content that day, you can talk about the origins of your beans and the stories behind the people that harvest coffee beans, and what does coffee beans actually mean, and how to do a coffee tour and the best regions in the world to do. So you're taking what you have, and it's not talking about your brand at all, but you're looking outside into that macro environment and the macro environment. So your coffee shop, your city, your country, your continent, then your industry as a whole, the history. There's so many channels that content can open up for you. And this is what today is all about. Today is about literally taking your brain, the creative side of your head, and unlocking it and going, all right, this is the key that this presentation is going to give you. Open that space up and understand how much there is available. I can never, ever accept from a client or content creator the statement, I have nothing to post. We always have something to post. And it can be down to the sky, the plants, the air, the day, the city. I can sit here for a week just talking about content, because there's always content around you. We are in such a content electric world that there's always stuff that you can post. Now, as always, if you've got questions, drop them into the chat. I definitely will come back to them. And I want to definitely get a feel from you on how you're feeling about content. At the moment, I would like in the chat box, if anyone is feeling like they struggle maybe a little bit, or if they find content overwhelming, we're a small group tonight, so it's easy for us to have a really good interaction. If you find you're struggling with content, just drop me a yes in the chat box, because I want to understand how people feel about content creation on the whole. So networking is always a great way, because you got your ear to the ground, you're speaking to people, you know what's happening in your area, and it'll always give you some type of indication of where you need to be going. Solutions and not commentary comes back to emotional branding. You know, we don't want to talk at people, we want to talk to people. So with everything that you're creating, keep the person in mind, keep your brand personality in mind, and keep the emotions that flow between the brand creator, who might be you, or it might be your team, and the audience, and what is happening in their world at any one time. And question everything. You know, anything that you get given, anything that comes out of the world, anything, you know, anything that you pose a question to your audiences encourages them to talk, encourages loads of things to be happening. So it's always a great way. Now, at the end of today's session, I'm going to introduce to you who our next speaker on the podcast is. And the relevancy of that is that she is a content creator. She works in the lifestyle fashion space. And that is something that I find really incredible. And she does amazing work with flat lace. So you see very little of her face at any one time. But throughout the presentation, you might see a few photos pop up, and they're all hers. So on the podcast is where you'll get to hear her story. And she has amazing, amazing advice for content creators as well. So this is a simple photo. She was obviously doing a partnership with Superdry, or Supega, sorry, with Supega. And obviously you sometimes run out of backgrounds, or like, how can I shoot shoes? I don't want to shoot them down on the ground. Just change your perspective. The purpose of me putting this photo in is because I want you to understand that when you create content, sometimes all you need to do is look up. And it's that simple. Just look up. You might see something hanging from your roof. You might see something that's unique. You might see shapes. It's one of the silly things that I say to people. And I'm like, well, if you're looking down and you're struggling to put your content plan together, look up. You don't know what is around you until you start looking at it through those content creator eyes. And hopefully after today's presentation, you'll have exactly that. You'll have a sort of new perspective where you sort of lifted the blinds, and you can look around and go, wow, like, that blue frame that's been sitting on my shelf for ages actually works really well. And this is applicable across any industry. I challenge you to find me an industry where content creation tips and tools can't be applied. Maybe the bright pink nails won't work in a legal profession, but everything can be. A coffee cup can work in a legal profession. A tip of the day, a quote, a piece of advice. Everything you do, you know, a legal profession can take a photo of the sky and say it's a great day to get a fresh perspective. Or, you know, if you're in family law, have you looked up and taken a deep breath? Today's a day to get in touch with our office because you need to change your circumstance. There's always, always, always opportunity in everything around us. So my first tip, if you write nothing else down today, is always look up. Look up from your computer, look up from your page, look up from your stress, look up from your sort of mental block on content. Look up and you'll find some sort of solution. So moving on, what is content marketing? Now, if you have understood so far that if you're a content creator, you're creating material, educational or entertainment, and you're sharing that with your target audiences. Content marketing is obviously that industry. It's the industry of taking marketing that's focused on creating, publishing, distributing content to your target audience. It's generally online. So when we talk about content, we generally talk about online platforms, which is all the things that would fall under your social media and all the things that would fall under digital. So you wouldn't consider a billboard on the side of a highway as content. That would be advertising. So when we're talking about content, we're talking purely about elements related to your brand, that's related to your marketing, that are focused on your online platforms to your audience. And a lot of the time we utilize these to either attract attention or generate leads or promote sales and look at expanding the customer base that we either have or acquiring a new base. So as you can see in some of the photos that I've put into this presentation, Donna is the lady that is going to be featured or is featured on the podcast this week. Donna utilizes very simple things. Some days she's got beautifully decorated flat lays. Other days she's got her feet in the sky and beautiful clouds behind her. And other days when she's on travel, it's literally just focusing on the details. So this is the thing. I don't, irrelevant what is in the photo, what I want you to focus on is what is being focused on from a content perspective. And I want you to just keep telling yourself you are never, ever running out of content. There's always something and there's always content for you to be posting. Now, if we're going to move on to the next section, which for me is probably the most important part, because we all know, and even if we don't know the labels that go attached to it, we all know that content and the creation of content is what we need, because most of us have Instagram, most of us have Facebook, and anything you put out on those platforms is content. So whether you're posting your family barbecue, just your close network of friends, or you're posting what your business's next launch is, that's content. We've been doing it. We know what it is. What's important for me is, from a business and brand perspective, that you understand the importance of repurposing, so sustainable content creation. And what that means is, when you're creating a piece of content, when you're designing your campaign, and there's a number of reasons this is important, I want you to be able to take one focus point and make that work across multiple platforms. So I've got an actual one of my content plans that I've put together. I'm not a very pedantic document keeper. So I will not spend 4 hours on Excel sheet creating a plan. I will jot down the plan and spend 4 hours executing the plan, rather than planning meticulously to make sure each sentence sounds right. I'm a bit more of a, okay, I'm going to put my ideas down, sort it through, get a rough idea of what's happening, and then wing it and make it happen. Everyone's work style is different. That doesn't mean that you do things wrong. It doesn't mean that you do things right. That's just the way my brain works. So I've found through working that if I pair myself up with either a support team or assistant, or a brand team around me that fill that gap of being meticulous, of keeping documents, of creating the pitch work, it works quite well. I'm quite haphazard. I'm a very I like to think under pressure type of person. So know what type of, whether you're a small business, whether you're managing a corporate team, know yourself well enough to know where you have gaps to plug. And the reason I say this is because when you're creating your content plan, it's important to know what your style is, so that you know how much in advance you need to plan, whether you're the type that can just keep everything in here and just roll it off on the day. Like, you know what you have to work with. You'll maybe have the photo in your hand. You go, right, I know I'm going to do this on this platform. I'm going to say that on that platform. I'm going to say that. I'm just going to work it off from there. If not, you can create a content plan, physical plan on a piece of paper, on a document, and work from there. Now, how to repurpose your content. The best way to approach your content marketing is with the objective of being sustainable. So that, again, is just utilizing the same thing in multiple spaces. And that means that you can get the maximum placement and maximum extension, which, if you in the industry where your brand needs to do photo shoots, you'll require less shoots. If you're in the industry where you need to promote ads, you have to create less ads, and you can promote more spend behind specific ads. So there's a lot of reasons that will save you time, save you money, save you effort, save you stress. And if you create beautiful content, keep in mind how quickly people's feeds move if we're talking social media networking sites. And it's a shame if you go out and you spend an hour, 2, 3, 4. I have clients that spend days on a shoot for Instagram. And it makes no sense if you're not utilizing that content elsewhere. And again, it doesn't matter whether you're a personal brand, whether you are a business brand, whether you are a team, a corporate, a small business, it does not matter. You create the content that you need, and you should be able to push that across different mediums. Now, when repurposing your content, the most important thing to keep in mind is making sure that despite the core content being created, so despite knowing, okay, I want to market this iPhone. You know this, you have the iPhone, you have a picture of the iPhone. What you need to keep in mind is that when you push that messaging out across multiple platforms, that the tone of voice is suited to the platform. And we've touched on this in the past. And that is, for me, is the most important part of when you're spreading, when you're distributing that content, that you get right. So for example, and you'll see it very clearly in the example I have next, LinkedIn, we're going back to the Dolly Parton challenge, if you keep that in mind. LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, all have a very different audience, all have a very different purpose, and all have a very different voice. Now, if you go back to last week where I said, create your social media box and outline your mission in each of them. What is it that you want to get out of that platform for your brand? Do you want to make new friends? Do you want to sell things? Do you want to generate newsletter signups? What is it that you want to get out of that platform? And then you know the tone of voice you need to be using in that space. Now, when you're creating that content plan, you want to use your boxes to create the plan. And when you do that, it'll allow you to see everything in front of you and know exactly what it is you need to be sharing. Now, I'm going to share a different screen with you, just to sidebar for a minute. This is an example of a content plan that I use. All right. Now, again, I don't necessarily keep them all. Every campaign that I do does not look like this. So I'd be lying if I say it does. But it'll give you a perfect idea of how you can start. And maybe once you become a bit au fait with how the way you should be thinking and the way you should be approaching your content needs to work. Now, it's a lot of writing, so don't read ahead, only because I want you to listen to what I'm saying. Now, as you can see, I've taken a simple example. If you follow, which I hopefully you all do, if you follow me on social media, you'll see that this week I launched the library, which is the section of the website dedicated to wonderful people like yourselves, which is where I thought, instead of me having to send you to YouTube and send you guys newsletters directly or worksheets directly, I'll put everything in one space. I want to be able to add offers, and eventually that space will mature into a membership area. So a subscription-based membership, which is down the track. But for now, I want you to focus on what this is. So I use the example of the library launch to show you what a content plan can look like. So now if you focus on your screen, down the left-hand side are 3 categories. I've put the content and the call to action. So that means, what is it that I'm posting and what is it that I'm going to be asking my audiences to do? Now, remember, when you're creating content, 90% of the time, I'd like you to focus on having a call to action. And that call to action may be to like, maybe to comment, maybe to sign up to the website, maybe to just visit the website, maybe to book, maybe to pay, maybe to buy. It's just a good idea to put that behind, because it also makes it trackable. So in the first category, I've got what the post is going to be, like what the physical image or video or is going to be, what my call to action is going to be, then the copy, and copy just means the caption, the words that are going to go with it, and the objective. So why am I doing it? Now, you don't need to have objective with each one, but it allows you to segregate what you're doing each one for. If we go back to the top, I have then put all the different channels that I activate in. Instagram post, Instagram story, Facebook, LinkedIn, website, newsletter, emailer. Now, if we're going to go through, I'm going to go through one column from top to bottom. So work with me vertically. For my Instagram post for the library launch, I was going to do a static, I'm going to put it up on my phone, a static image of the library. So what the front page of that library section looked like, that is what I wanted my post to be. So if you can see my phone, that's going to be it, right? That's the static image that I'm talking about. And then I said my call to action on that was going to be to visit the website, to browse the section, subscribe to the newsletter if they don't have subscriptions already, because in that's how they'll get access. The copy of that is going to be very promotional, very exciting, very emotive, like big news, guys. I'm so excited. For me, Instagram is a very friendly medium. I see everyone on my Instagram page as friends. I have my communication as friends. I talk to them like I would talk to my friends and send them a WhatsApp. So the same way I would WhatsApp a friend and say, super excited to share with you this project that I'm doing, is my tone, my selected tone for Instagram. So with this post, I went with big news, excited to launch. It's an exclusive area. Look out for the newsletter. And bearing in mind, I know my audiences on that might be subscribers, might not be subscribers. So I've got to have 2 sort of parallel bits of messaging. One for those that are subscribers, to say, guys, wait for it. Like, there's going to be some newsletters coming out with your access details. And if you're not, I don't want to be exclusive. You can then sign up for the newsletter and you get the same benefits. And then my objective is obviously general awareness and to drive subscription. If we move on to the Instagram story part of it, again, I've done a different set of content. So I then went onto my homepage. I did some content, I did a video, a screen record of the journey that you would take. If you jumped on the website, you opened the page, you logged in, and all the different bits of information you can access. I went through it as if it was sort of point of view, POV that we would call it. So my action on Instagram story was click the link in the bio, because obviously, as you know, with followers being under 10,000, you don't have the swipe up option. So click the link in the bio, sign up on the homepage. Again, similar call to actions, but slightly different in terms of where I'm sending my audiences. The copy or the caption that went with that was to post what was going on my feed. So check out this post. It was also a fast-paced video. So you want people to like catch it, but want more. So you're creating a little bit of a teaser campaign. And we wanted the subscriber area to be live, and we wanted people to know that it's live. So I said, our subscriber area is live. Remember, you've got a very limited time frame. You've got 15 seconds on stories that you have to communicate to. And so I wanted to get my messaging across very concisely. Subscriber area is live, and visit the website or click in the bio. So those three things, very sharp, very quick. And to scroll down, the greater awareness through the post. So I wanted to then highlight, most of us will receive greater views on our stories than we will on our Instagram feed posts. It's just how it works. So I wanted to be able to drive the traffic back that way, drive the traffic to the link, and drive the traffic to other spaces. If anyone's got questions as I'm going along, throw them in the chat box and I'll switch back and forth. From there, I went on to the Facebook. So I said, okay, for Facebook, I can do the same thing as my Instagram. My Facebook and Instagram tone is very similar, so I can possibly share that feed post. So it cuts down my work in another area, and I'm happy because I believe the tones are quite similar for Instagram and Facebook. You can strip back on your hashtags if you want. You can go back to the rules about the hashtags, strip back on those kinds of things, but essentially the style of messaging would be the same. You can add links in there, so you can add in the website, so it makes it easily accessible. With any piece of content you create, and specifically online, which is what we're talking about today, all online content, utilize the click-through, utilize the swipe up, utilize anything that makes the user journey faster, easier, and more efficient, because the likelihood of them ending up where you want them to be is going to be far greater. So moving on to LinkedIn, which is an interesting transition. So we saw the tone between Instagram story, Facebook, all very friendly, like we're talking to our mates. Going on to LinkedIn, it's obviously a very corporate environment. It's everyone that's, in business and that you work with, or that, your colleagues in the industry that are seeing it. So the language has to change slightly. So I went with the homepage graphic because for me, that ticked all the boxes. Then I wanted to drive visitation to the website so that people in the industry, potential partners, potential collaborators, jump on the website, which for me, even just going through the website alone would be a win. And then the library was a sort of added benefit. But the library gave me that step up. It gave me that leverage to say there's something new, so go check out my whole project. So in terms of LinkedIn wording, and this is important for you to realize, it's very different. It's slightly formal. It's slightly more like industry. You're speaking to someone that's on your kind of industry level. You assume that most people in there know more than you, perhaps know the same as you. So you want to make sure that your tone is very conversational, slightly formal maybe. So that's how I view my LinkedIn space. So you can see immediately, I've said, as a founder of a community-based brand and PR project, I'm so excited to launch the library. So the tone is completely different. An exclusive space on the website where subscribers can access, blah, 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 blah. So I'm explaining it out because assuming that most people on there may or may not have spent the time to dig, most of them might be interested in the space, but just need to be reminded about what it is. So the tone's very different. But again, the content, the image is still the same. It's just being repurposed. And the purpose of being there and posting that there is corporate awareness, potential partners, and general awareness of well-branded. We move on to the website. I updated the graphics. Obviously, it is nice, and this is what's going to come up this week, to have a pop-up when you arrive. And again, I'm going to use probably the same image that's on my library page. The pop-up's going to be there and say, get exclusive access to the library, drop your email in here. So the call to action is subscription. If someone is a subscriber, a little button will say, already a subscriber. Click here. It'll take you directly to the password page and you get access that way. So I hope, and if I'm confusing anyone, or if anyone's sort of feeling like this isn't explaining it well enough, please drop me a note in the chat box. But I really wanted you to see a practical example of exactly how I do it, so that you understand that it's not me preaching off textbook explanations. It's very real. It's very practical explanations as to how things are done. I'll send you a template of this in this week's newsletter so that you get a feel of how you can separate out your ideas. Then in the newsletter, which most of you would have received, it was your access details. It was what that area is for. The graphic would have been the same, exactly the same graphic. But now you're talking to a crowd or a group of people that already know what they're in for, in the sense that they know well-branded. They sign up, they join the webinars, and now you want to excite them about the space. You want to excite them about going in, using the access code, logging in. So you really want people to understand that the space is there for them. So if we go to the caption, it was a description of the section. It was a link. Again, remember I said use as many active links as you can. It was a link. It was a code. It was a graphic. It was everything to hopefully hype everyone up enough to click on the link, go to that section and utilize the area. Once they're there, there's no conversion. So unlike a sale or a booking or something like that, the library it's an end of the road to some extent. For the moment, until offers or subscriptions or any conversions are loaded, it's an end of the road. So I want you to just get there. I want you to see what's there. I want you to see that all your newsletters are uploaded. I want you to see that your all worksheets are there. And I want you to have easy access to view all webinars. And once you're there, I've ticked my box. You know it's there. You're comfortable with it. You know how to use it. And my objectives with the newsletter is just to feature it. It's just to highlight it. It's just to grab your attention. Now, remember, for me, everyone that signed up to the newsletter has access to that space, firstly. And secondly, if they've already signed up to my newsletter, they're already part of my crowd, like they're my fans. So I don't need to sell in anything additional in that respect. And I know that we're almost speaking the same language. I just want you to know it's there. So again, my tone will be closer to Instagram, but slightly less promotional. And lastly, my emailer, which is the one that went out in the week to sort of say, it's not the newsletter, it's just the highlight of the library being launched. So here's your access code, here's your details, here's a few other things. And then I threw in 2 other things. So with your shorter, sort of punchier correspondence, like an email shot is what we would call it. It's not lengthy. It's not sort of weekend scrolling and reading like your newsletter. It's more, boom, this is happening. Here's what you need to know. Here's the click. Here's the details. Go. It's not a scroll through and read. So with the emailer, it was flyer style. There were 3 sort of very image-led stories. One was the library, one was today's webinar, and one was the podcast. And all I want you to do is, here's 3 bits of exciting things happening this week. Click on either one, click on all, do what you need to. But here it is. I'm just pulling it out from the newsletter. I'm pulling it off social media and I'm drawing your attention to it. So with the email shot, it was very much about me being excited to launch it, sharing the details and sharing the highlights of things going on as a community. So if you imagine the email newsletter space for me is very much like what you would imagine at a community board. You know that it's your community, you're comfortable with them, and you just want to make sure that they know there's free. You know, if you go to an old school, I remember going to the Westfield Library in Durban, and you'd look at this punch board and you'd see that, oh, well, there's karate lessons this weekend, there's ballet happening, there's a free trial for this happening. So it's really just sharing of information. And for me, the newsletter and the emailer is exactly that. So I hope that's making sense to you guys. If it's not, just let me know, because I'm happy to re-explain or come back to it. But for the moment, I'm just going to head back to our presentation. So that for me was the easiest way to explain to you how to create your own, is to show you how I use it in a practical example. Then if we move further down, it comes back to what I said at the very beginning. And this is where I would love you all, A, to listen to the podcast because it's really important, but B, go look at people like Donna's page, because again, no matter what industry you're in, it's not what she's posting, it's the way she's posting that I want you to keep in mind. It's the fact that you can find things in everyday spaces that you can create content with. You know, the same, I'm trying to think of an example on my desk, but the same pen holder today can be photographed the whole thing. Tomorrow you can just focus on the tips of the pens. Tomorrow, the next day you can focus in on the gold pencil. Silly example, but illustrates my point that one thing has so many different perspectives. And similarly, you can focus on things like your light and your dark, you know, your lamps on your desk, the lights from the top. You can focus on the way a shadow falls on something, the way the trees, you know, cross your face if you're more in the lifestyle space. If you're more in a corporate environment, same sort of thing. Like your office must look different in the day and must look different at night and must look different. And you can relate your messaging to it. You just got to think outside the box. Colors, textures, details, focus on the details, focus on nature, focus on props are a great thing to invest on depending on your industry. You can buy a cheap set of props. And as you go along places, you might see something, you think, oh, that coffee cup has a saying that is so relevant in our office. It would make a great Instagram post. you can start collecting little things as you go along the way, whether you're in beauty, whether you're in fashion, that will help you on your content creation journey. Someone's in the chat, Bibi Aisha, welcome back, saying she gets overwhelmed. And I 100% agree. You know, it's so easy to get overwhelmed because there's this pressure to post all the time. And whether that's on a blog or anything else, the other thing to keep in mind is when you are utilizing content that is written, there's even more opportunities to repurpose. Because if you're writing an article about one element, there must be details in an article that can spur off other conversations. So a very easy example to give you would be if you're talking about something like travel. So I recently wrote an article that I haven't published yet on Rio, and what I loved about Rio and how the whole journey went. From that single piece of content, I can then do spin-offs, 10 best things to do in Rio, what to pack for Rio, the 10 best places to eat in Rio, 5 best places to eat in Rio, what not to do, is Rio safe? All the different spin-offs that come from one article. And as you create the article, you go back to the original and you link it. So you might have a sentence in your original article that says, we found Rio safer than we thought. And you highlight the word safer and you link it to the article about how safe is Rio. Or you might talk about the beach in one area of your original article. You link it to, or you put a highlighted statement below it, read more, what were the 10 things not to miss. So there's loads of opportunities to have spin-off content from what you're creating. Now, this is an example of using something like store-bought chocolate and textures. So you've got water, you've got wood, you've got chocolate, which is super simple, and you've got textures. Now you could put those same chocolates on a whiteboard, you could put the chocolates on a kitchen counter, you could put it on a tray. There's a million ways you can shoot chocolates. But just by playing with nature, so you've got ocean, which could have been a lake, it could have been a tub, it could have been anything, it's water. You've got wood, which I think at least 50% of us have some sort of varied textures around us, whether it's the outside of the building, the mats, the carpets, tiles, towels, playing with texture, playing with nature, playing with color. So if you go back to that slide about inspiration is everywhere, just those headers, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, can spur off so much of what you have going on. Here's another fashion example also from Donna, and it's, you know, it's her tiles of her floor, it's a rock, it's a lipstick, and it's a shoe. And I mean, it almost is or isn't relevant as to what the focus of that image is, but the caption is there to define that. So Donna works with a lot of big brands like Christian Louboutin, and I don't want to give too much away because I'd love you to go listen to it from her on the podcast. But so much of her success, and she doesn't have like tens of thousands of followers, and that's the beauty of her story for me, is that she promotes just doing things the right way, being passionate, being hardworking, and being recognized as a result. But if you look at her content, her Instagram handle is called @DonnaHeartsBeauty. And if you look at her content, it's all simple. It's just using things that are available. Yes, she might have bought the piece of greenery that's in the background, but she'll repurpose that in so many ways. And in every industry, there's some level of props that you can use. So that is my overview of content creation. I mean, it would be easier as well if someone had specific questions about their industry that they want me to answer. But in essence, the key takeaways I have for you today are a few. One is to plan your content. B is, and I'm not going to repeat the obvious things like know your audience, know your story, know your values, because you should know that that's the overhanging archway for everything that we talk about. But with regard to content is to know your channels, know what you have to work with, know what it is and the frequency that you're wanting to post across your channels, and know the voices that you want to talk in. And then just play, just have a good play of what's going on and what you want to communicate, what you have to work with. And you don't need to invest in hundreds of thousands of dollars or even tens of thousands of dollars on photo shoots or, you know, expensive photographers. Donna shoots everything on her iPhone. You know, I'm fortunate my husband is a photographer, but I don't shoot all of my stuff with my husband. A lot of it I shoot on my phone. A lot of it I've shot for clients. I mean, we've done client food shoots on iPhones, and none of myself or my team were photographers. There's just opportunity in everything that you do. You know, we've shot clothing brand videos, we've shot interviews, we've shot so much that goes on. The podcast, most of my podcast is done off my phone. So there's loads of opportunities. I don't want you to get caught up in the expenditure of creating content, because it's a fallacy. You don't need a huge budget to create amazing content. Yes, the quality improves with the equipment, that's a given. But for the moment and the size that most of our content is shared in terms of the actual image size, you can use most of the tools that you already have. I mean, if you don't already know, Instagram rewards people that don't share massive files. So the minute you're sharing a big DSLR image, and there's a place for that, don't get me wrong, but a DSLR, for anyone that doesn't know, are the sort of fancier, you know, the big Nikons and Canons, and Instagram shrinks photos anyway, because it has to store all of our material on a database. So the minute your image is really big, Instagram like plummets it down the list, because it's a lot more work for the network to deal with. Whereas as opposed to a good sized image, like a 1 or 2 GB MB sized image is a perfect size, as long as your clarity is. I always check the quality of my imagery when you scan. So if you zoom in and you sort of stretch it and you still see detail, you're fine. If you're looking at an image and it's all hazy and blurry just by looking at it on the feed, it's not good enough quality. And that's the other thing I want you to keep in mind. When creating content, I would rather you spend less time on volume and more time making sure the file's right, the size is right, the clarity is right, the coloring is right, than taking a million photos to show 1,000 different things and then like editing it and filtering it and changing it and distorting it, because the quality of your content is far more important about the number of images that you put out. Because I don't respond well to brands that have poor quality imagery at all. If it's blurry, and for me, it's a lack of attention to detail from a brand. And if you can't do that on your own Instagram feed, how are you doing that with my brand experience with your company? So for me, focus on the quality of your images, focus on the details. I'm going to put like a rough guide to specs in this week's newsletter for you to understand what you need to be looking at with each medium. But there's no hard and fast rule. You're welcome to load a 4K massive video onto Facebook. I don't know that Facebook will like you very much. I don't know if people across different markets that may have different internet speeds and capacities will like you very much. In fact, they probably won't access your information at all. So keep in mind who's consuming your content when you create it, and make it so that it is the most versatile, the highest quality possible, and easily accessible. So if anyone has any questions, please throw it into the chat box. I'm more than happy to answer it. And yeah, as a closing slide, for most of you that already know, subscribe to the newsletter, join us on the website. There's obviously the new space in the website called the library for you. And my podcast interview with Donna went live this afternoon. So if you have a minute, it's 35-40 minutes, play it in the car, play it in your ears. And it's really useful because Donna's really got a very real and very honest take on how you can create your content. And even if you're not looking to become a content creator, even if you're just looking to up your own game with your brand, it's still very relevant information and help that she shares. So I will jump into the chat, and I'll have the chat going on the side. If anybody wants to ask me any questions, please feel free to. I see that a few people have said that they do sometimes struggle to create content, and that's everyone. I mean, I sit some days and I think, I haven't posted in 2 days. What am I going to post today? There's always so much you want to share. But I think if you're really on a day where you're feeling really unenthusiastic about it and you just really have to dig deep and the caption's not really coming together, it's fine. Just take a break. There's nothing worse than what feels like a forced bit of communication. So take a break, let your brand get a breather, let it maybe even reevaluate and recalibrate until it has something useful to share, and then go from there. Right, let's go to the chat. What are your rules for a post being an Instagram post on an Instagram story? Okay, that's a good question. So for me, first of all, I'm going to say that I don't think there's any rules as such. I think that you and your brand define your own set of guidelines for your feed. I'm definitely not one to advocate that super themed look. And we're talking specifically Instagram only now, of course. I'm not one that'll go, okay, well, my look is pastel, so I either post a photo that's pastel washed or not at all. Personally, for my brands, I like to have a sort of thread that ties a week together. So for me, the theme isn't so much color led, it's week led, because I try and tie in the newsletter with the podcast, with the speaker, with what I'm talking about. It doesn't always work out that way. So for me, the rule is more, if it's a beautiful image, if it communicates effectively what I need to talk about, it makes it to the feed. And stories is where I have the opportunity to promote the feed. So I always ask myself, where do I want the information to be distributed from first? So in some cases, and you'll see this between my personal and the business account, you might see, today's a good example with Donna. Now, Donna, I know we have quite a big overlapping social circle. So I took my first Instagram story about Donna onto my personal Instagram story. Then I took it onto an Instagram post for Well Branded. And then I promoted that post with a story on Well Branded. So it's very much for me about what you're pushing and which audiences you want to access it first. Think about it as a big launch, like Nike, for example, releases certain shoes to certain markets before others, because they know, A, the impact of that market on the rest of the world is greater. So if they release in the US, it hypes up the rest of the world because it's out in the US and desperate to get it. And then other markets then take the lead. And that's the thinking purely behind limited release. And not to say we're all Nikes, but the same concept applies. So if I'm looking at a post, there's a couple of things I look at. The aesthetic, like I like my post to be very polished. I like my feed posts to be very polished. I like to sort of make sense. And the other thing for me is I like the feed post to be the strongest image on hand. So I will then utilize that in stories at a later stage. But if I look at 10 images, the strongest will be used on feed, and then the others I'll juggle between for stories. Also remember, stories are ever changing. So you can be a lot more flexible on stories and regurgitate on stories a lot more than you would on a feed. Let me know if that answers your question, Ashik. I'm happy to go back to it. How much time would you recommend dedicating to a post, image, and caption? I find sometimes I end up spending so much time on a post that it makes it difficult to be consistent. Look, that's a very personal process. I know there's people that I work with very closely that spend hours on their captions and their posts. My thinking is, if you plan ahead, so if you've got your content calendar of what you want to communicate, you sort of, whether you realize it or not, your brain's working on how you're wanting to communicate it. So I would definitely sit down and do your content planning with your rough ideas. So when I do my content planning or my social media calendar, I don't write out the caption word for word. I write down the highlights of what I know I want to get in, because I'm the type of person that on the day I'll rewrite something anyway. It also will come down to how your strength in creativity is. If you're confident that you are happy to write your captions and they flow quite easily, then great. If you get help from a copywriter, for example, if you're corporate or business and you use a copywriter, then I assume you need to think about it ahead of time to send it across to them. How much time? It's a very gray area. I couldn't even tell you how much time I spend, because I grab minutes in between, especially now working from home, in between my son and his food and Paw Patrol and trying to get my own work done and working on presentations and worksheets. And I'll spend a bit of time. I definitely don't encourage that social media, specifically networking, needs to occupy the majority of your time. If it's taking up too much of your time, you need to go back to the organization, the planning phase, and utilize that base of planning captions and planning ahead of time. Then you might put a day aside and plan for the month, which is fine. But if you're spending 3 to 4 hours a day, like scrolling because you're stuck. Also, when you're writing captions, my advice would be, don't get distracted. Sit down, think about what you're wanting to post, think about your call to action. Another question that comes up, which is similar to yours, is how long should a caption be? There's no rule. If you have a lot to say, choose the most important bits and put that in your caption. If you have a lot to say, like when someone's having a massive rant, for example, they go from caption and they fold the caption into comments. I never advise that. If you've got that much that you need to say, you can either spill over to stories and save your stories to highlights, or spread it over a few posts, or do one long caption. So a good example is, I don't know if many of you have followed, but my personal Instagram, yesterday I shared something about my well-branded journey and why I started it and where I sort of came from with it. And it's a much longer post than I normally would post. And I ummed and ahed about it for ages. I sent it to a friend of mine and I said, do you think I should cut this down? And she said, no, it's relevant. And she tweaked it a bit. So the other thing I'd say is use someone as a sounding board. If you feel you're spending too much time writing captions yourself, it could just be that you're putting yourself under a lot of pressure to create that content yourself. And you might need another brain, a fresh perspective, re-look at your feed. Do you love your feed? I want you to look at your feed and love it. And that's Instagram, Facebook, your blog post, your website. When I started Well Branded, and I just use me because I want you guys to understand that I'm not preaching at you, I'm sharing. So when I created Well Branded, I could have gone the route of agency, but we're all trying to be cost effective. We're all trying to cut down in areas we don't need to be wasting. And I had played with Wix in the past, which is a site that I want you all to write down, Wix, W-I-X, Wix.com. And I played and I sat up at night because that's when I get to do my work. And I thought, you know what? I am literally building this business with my two hands, everything. I'm starting my Instagram off fresh. I'm starting my website off fresh. And I want to be able to share the journey with entrepreneurs and new businesses the way that I've experienced it. I don't want to sit here and say, if you don't have a big budget, try a site like Wix. And in the meantime, I've handed my site off to a massive agency for $20,000 US. So that's fine. If you're corporate and you have that capacity, that's absolutely fine. But if you're asking a question about dedication of time, I assume that's not the position you're in. And I want you to allocate something reasonable, and I want you to step back if it's causing you too much stress. So let me know if that answers your question, Shanaz. I'm happy to sort of readdress that and try and package it differently if that would help. Catherine, how often should one post on Instagram? Again, it depends on your brand. I generally try to post daily because there's a lifestyle element to the brand as well. If you're I'm trying to think of an example. If you're a financial services company, you might not want to post on weekends because you might not want to invade your customers' time off. If you are I'm trying to think of a good example. If you're in a food brand, here's a good example. If you're a food brand, you might alter the times of the day that you post. Say, for example, in the Middle East, at one stage, we were all encouraged that first half of the day during Ramadan, you don't post food because the majority of the country are fasting, and you post food closer to or post the break of fast. So it's very much industry specific, Catherine, is my answer. I generally wouldn't go more than 3 days without posting because you do need to stay top of mind for your audiences. Even if you're using different platforms, something like a blog, you can do once every 2 weeks, once every week, whatever you have the time. But Instagram specifically, I would say between 1 and 3 days would be my opinion. Ashik, do you use apps and software? Yes. So this is the fun part of this conversation. So there's a couple of apps that I will put into the newsletter so you don't have to worry to write down. And it's something that I pulled both from my database of things that I use as well as Donna's. Now, as you know, earlier I said Donna creates content for huge amounts of brands. And some of the apps we've sort of pulled together to share with you today are these. So when you're creating videos these days, you realize that your content is being consumed across different markets generally. So my accent might not come across perfectly in a video to someone. My intonations, my pronunciations might not always be right. We're not always au fait with every word. We're dealing with different markets, different cultures. So one of the apps that I'd recommend is called Clips. And it basically is the app that subtitles your videos. You'll see more and more people using it on social media now for YouTube. And it simply allows for anyone hearing impaired to have access to your content. But it also means that if someone doesn't understand your tone, your pace, your pronunciation, that everything's there in text at the bottom. So Clips is your sort of subtitle app. The second one, which is is my go-to for story creation, is called Unfold. And it basically allows you to create beautiful stories with ready-made templates. Now, hopefully in the next couple months, I'll be sharing with you some of the templates that I use, but essentially your templates can be anything. But Unfold has like different albums of templates that you can use, and it really makes stories look beautiful. So even if you've just got a few images, even if they're really crappy images sometimes, we can get away with a bit more in stories. You put them into an app like Unfold, it really pretties them up. The other thing is Facetune, and I know that sounds like adjusting your face and changing your eye color, and that's not it at all. One of the main functions that both Donna and I use it for is it cleans up photos. So for example, if you're doing a flat lay, or if you're taking a photo on a wall or something like that, and there's a smudge or a mark or pencil scratch, or if your wall's off white, like in my home, our walls aren't bright white, and I really like that bright white look sometimes, or the colors might not fall in the right way in your space. So Facetune has the white brush that allows you to brighten up the background, which would make your photos pop. It also is the app that a lot of the influencers use. And this is something I'd never advocate, but it is the app that people use to adjust, you know, their cheeks, their teeth, their body. It is a dangerous tool to play with, because when you push one side, another side expands. When you push one side, another side, and you can see it because it distorts things. It doesn't do things in proportion. That's like a logistical reason why I don't like it. I also don't like the idea of us feeling the pressure to change what you look like or what a model looks like or whoever you're shooting. But Facetune is there. It has good uses. It does have filters in it as well. So if you want to filter a photograph, which is great, like do it. It has the patch function, so you can patch up an area and match if you've got a kink in something. You can smooth out creases on clothing. You can make things vanish. The same patch function has vanish. So if, for example, you know, sometimes you don't realize you take a photo in a space and, you know, you've got, I don't know, a strap or something that shouldn't be there, and you can just take that out. So Facetune is a good one. Snapseed, similar to Facetune, allows you to play with your color balances and your, I'm not very au fait with Photoshop or Illustrator yet. My husband's a genius at it, but that's not my thing. So instead, I play around in Snapseed if I need to brighten something or lighten something. And I mean, look, if you're one of the hashtag no filter families, that's up to you. But for me, when I create content, I want to create the most beautiful content I can. And if enhancing a sky color or brightening up an exposure, if that's what you need to do, then that's what you need to do. You know, I accept that there's a movement of no filter, take photos raw, and that definitely works. Specifically, we're talking about personal photos or whatever, but I'm in favor of, if there's technology there to, you know, make your brand look a little brighter and a little better, then use it. The other one that I highly recommend for video editing is called InShot. It's not the same as sort of using, what's it called? Final Cut Pro. Which is a computer program. It's not the same as using iMovie, which I've been playing with a little bit lately. But if you've got a few short clips from a video or a launch or a product that you want to put together, if you want to create little hyperlapse, it's stuff we can all do ourselves. Like, we need to also develop, if we've learned nothing from the last few months of crisis, we need to develop a little bit of independence as brand custodians, whether you manage that brand yourself, whether it's a brand that you manage for a team or a manager. Try and teach yourself something that you can now do yourself, and it's not even about saving money or offloading an agency. It's just about being able to, if you need to create content on the go, if you're in an event, you don't have your agency there, you don't have a support staff, you don't have a videographer, that you're not completely unable to create anything for yourself. So InShot is the video editing one. Then one that Donna recommended, which is very true, is Unum, UNUM. I'll put these in the newsletter so you don't have to worry about catching them. And it essentially allows you to have an overview of your feed. So before you post a photo, if you're worrying about how it's going to look in relation to the rest, or if you have a couple photos and you want to plan which ones you put ahead and which ones you put after, Unum helps you do that. So those are the ones that I would recommend. And then, like I said earlier, Wix, remember that name, incredible for creating websites. Canva, CANVA, graphics, amazing tool to create your own graphics. It really makes you self-sufficient. Squarespace and WordPress are great blogging platforms, and you can build that into Wix. You can use Wix by itself. Obviously, YouTube is a fantastic app to host your videos. If you have longer than 15-minute videos, it's also good. You can go get yourself verified on YouTube, which is just a click and an approval. And you can put your longer videos on there. So whilst you might put your 1 to 15-minute tutorials on your social media networks, you might want to put something more lengthy, or a discussion or a conversation or an interview on YouTube on a longer one. So for me, guys, that's basically the top tips or the top apps that I use. I know that there's more recent ones. There's probably ones coming out every day. I've used these for years and I'm very happy with them. They do the job. They're user friendly. I'm certainly not the most digitally technical person you're going to find. So I'm not one to go work out coding or anything like I said to you earlier, I barely do Illustrator or Photoshop or anything like that. I try to do a lot of my phone because I'm on there a lot. And what I can't do on my phone, I do via Wix or Canva or something like that online. So I will share the list definitely in the newsletter so that you have it. If I can link it through to stuff, I will. And yeah, my only closing advice, if there aren't any more questions that are going to pop up, would be just to really sit down and invest creativity and reasonable amounts of time into your content planning. Because if you have your head around not just today, but what's coming up tomorrow and next week and the week after, your plan takes a better shape. So you're not going, oh, damn it, I used that photo last week, but it's actually better suited to what I've got coming up this week. So to prevent that kind of situation, because you got to be limited as well. You can't post the same thing over and over again because unfortunately our audiences are spoiled and we need to be really like spoon feeding them a high quality of content all the time. Catherine, design my website on Wix and Canva, use every day. I swear by them. I've really got into them for well branded, not so much before. Wix I've played with in the past, but Canva was something that I like really jumped into in the last few months over lockdown, really, because I've exhausted my budgets to look at extreme graphics teams. You know, with starting a business, we're all really tight on budgets. I mean, trying to watch where we're spending. I will say that there's still a huge value in working with someone that can create good graphics for you. If you missed my interview with Sangeeta from the Designery Studio, whilst Canva is great for us, the consistency element is a lot easier if you've got a graphic designer that can create your logo and then dump a bunch of templates in so that your brand stays consistent and then you just play in Canva. But honestly, everything from my son's birthday invitations to all the artwork you see, all the newsletters you see are all created in Canva. So I highly, highly recommend that site. I've missed a question about influencers. Have I? Let me go back, Non, and see what I've missed. There we go. Do influencers really create more traffic to a web? Oh, guys, I can be here for a week. All right. We're going to have a separate conversation about influencers, but I don't want to leave that as the last statement so that I answer your question. Yes and no is the honest answer. A big part of the yes of that answer is depending on who your influencers are, what type of contract you've got in place, and how well they deliver. The no is a vast majority of influencers can be a waste of time. So when you are looking at influencers for your content and to distribute your content, the selection is important. Understanding their numbers is important. And the higher the numbers does not mean that your yield or ROI, so your return on investment, is going to be higher. Absolutely not. The sincerity and the basic niceness of the person you're dealing with is something that I think is hugely underrated. You know, people, and I know there's brands in this region as well that spend a fortune with influencers, a fortune, and they'll pay you according to your following, right? But does that mean that the brand yields greater outcomes? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I've worked with brands that have got absolutely nothing from huge partnerships that they've entered into, that have had campaigns where huge parts of the deliverables haven't been met. And it's then the question of, well, do we now go pursue someone on a personal basis for not posting or visiting or looking happy? And it's just a very, very tricky space, influencer marketing. If it's done well, it can work for you. If it's done with measurable and accountable metrics, it can work for you. If it's done where you fully understand the analytics behind the personality, it can work for you. But there's a longer list of times it wouldn't work for you. People work with influencers because it makes them feel great about what they're doing, specifically smaller brands. Bigger brands, the association and the awareness is a gray area. So each brand you'd have to consider on a case-by-case But depending on the influencer and depending on the campaign, that answer would be either yes or no. But my experience is, at a time like this where we're all sort of tight, I wouldn't expect things for free from a brand, and I wouldn't expect that someone, you know, yeah, I think there's a much greater conversation to be had there. But the short and long answer is, it can be good for you, but my advice is always to have a watertight agreement on deliverables and measurables in place, so that when you reach that level and when they achieve that, then you're getting the right amount. Too many times brands get absolutely stuffed because they've given so much and they don't get nearly as much back in return. So I hope that answers the question. But we'll have an entire day dedicated to influencer marketing, because there's so much to talk about. Last year I did a series of conferences in South Africa, and one of my very good friends, who is an amazing influencer in the country, Maps, he had so much to share about how even with 1 million followers, you can never sit back and expect things to come to you. And I think it's personalities like his that are the influencers that work for your brand. And then there's hundreds of others that could just be a waste of your money. So sorry, it's a long answer, but it's a very complex subject. Thank you, Shema. Thank you for tuning in today. Shamira as well. Glad you enjoyed it. Nontebeko, thank you so, so much. Guys, if you haven't listened to the podcast, please do. Donna's amazing. And if you have heard some of the other ones, Megan Hess was on last week, and that's all there. Then Anna was amazing about talking about boundaries. Dale, if you're looking at the publishing industry, podcasting is really a space I'm enjoying. There's some unbelievable speakers coming up, and potentially tackling this very controversial, very interesting subject matter of the campaign going on globally, Black Lives Matter, and how everyday people like you and I that may want to make a difference, how we can do that. So that's coming up in the next couple of days on there as well. So thanks for joining in. Sorry that I was a few minutes late to sign on. I don't know 100% what time we'll do next week. So I'm just kind of shuffling around to see what is best for everyone. So thank you for joining me. If you're still on your weekend tomorrow, enjoy it. If you're back to work like the rest of us, oh well, lots of coffee. So thank you so much, guys. Appreciate all the time on a Saturday night. And yeah, as always, share, post on social media. I started sharing people's posts. So if you post a photo from the webinar or from being on the podcast or anything related to the brand, I'm sort of choosing 3 and 4 every week to feature on the newsletter and eventually on the website as well. So thanks for those that have done it. And if you haven't, just tag me, take a photo of your screen or anything that you feel is of value. Or better yet, if you're creating awesome content on the back of this session, let me know. Share it with me and let me know. So thanks for joining. Take care. Have a great night, everybody.